Hey guys, did you know you can check your email, get stock quotes, instant message somebody, get the weather, and a whole slew of other things right from your ham radio? Yeah, you can with APRSD. WB4BOR ham radio. Let's get started. Alright guys, so all that cool stuff and more you can do with APRSD. So how do we do that? Well, let's get into it a little bit. APRSD is a Python application that is officially released on the Python repository called pypy.org, and I will show you how to install it. And then we'll talk a little bit about the architecture and some of the kinds of things that you can do with it, what it means, etc., etc. So how do we install a Python app? The first thing we should do is create a virtual environment, because that ensures that any Python libraries, applications that you use to install are isolated into that environment, and it doesn't pollute the rest of your system. You can do this on Mac OS, Windows, Linux, whatnot. So you create the virtual environment with virtualenv, and then you specify the name. .vmv is what I called it. And then after you create it, you have to activate it. So now it's activated. That means any Python application that you install will go directly into that virtual environment and does not pollute the rest of your system. So to install APRSD, since it's in the public Python general purpose repository, you use pip install, and the application name is called APRSD. Okay, so this is pulling it down, finding the very latest version, which happens to be 2.5.3 currently when I'm making this video, and it pulls down all of the dependencies that APRSD has and installs them all into that virtual environment. And then once it is complete, which it looks like it is, it's installed, it's ready to use, ready to go. And you can verify that by running APRSD. Okay, so this is what you get when you type APRSD. You get the list of commands that are available to run, and the main command that you use when you want to stand APRSD up is server, and that starts a server process that connects to APRS network and basically starts the packet filtering process, which I'll walk you through. But for now, I want to talk about some of these commands that it has here. And one is called check version, completion, dev, health check, list plugins, listen, sample config, send message, server, and version. So those are all the commands that are available. And some of these you will be using as a user of APRSD, and some of them you'll only be using if you're developing plugins or testing APRSD itself. So one of the first things you could do is type APRSD version. What do we have? What version do we have? It's 2.5.3. So how do we know that that is the latest version? Well, you can run APRSD check version, and it'll go out on PyBee and then see what the latest version is installed out there. And since it's the one that we just installed and it is 2.5.3 currently, it says APRSD is up to date. Now I have another shell terminal here that I have an older version of APRSD installed, and so you can run check version there and see what the output is, which you can already see there. So it tells you that the version that you're currently running, and it's outdated compared to what is the latest, which was released 2 hours ago. All right, so it gives you kind of an idea of what check version does. All right, so completion, that's all about command line completion to help you type some of the commands and options or whatever. You can just type completion and it'll give you a list of commands. You can either show the shell completion, which you can copy and paste and put in your favorite bash RC file, zeus HRC file, or fish RC, or you can just do install, and it'll automatically detect what version of what shell you're running. It supports bash, Z shell, and the fish shell, and it'll install the completion command inside there, and then you just have to create a new shell or source that RC file, and then you get command line completion. So let's just, for example, let's let's just show what one would look like. So I'm running Z shell, and this is what will get dumped into your ZSHRC file, which then when you source it or create a new shell, you'll get the command line completion for APRSD. So after you tab, and then here's the completion. So the first thing it does is shows you list commands and so on. So I'm sure you know how command line completion actually works. It's kind of handy to have. All right, so there's another command called dev. And what this is for, there's only one command inside the dev group of commands, and that is called test plugin. And this is what I use for developing and testing my plugins prior to standing up a server of APRSD. So that lets me instantiate the test plugin object itself that I'm working on, send a message to it, and see what happens with it. So I'll show you how to run that in a second, but let's see what the list of available plugins are in this version of APRSD. And this is a new command that I just added today, and it shows you the list of plugins, the plugin name, kind of gives you an idea of what it might do. Excuse me, the plugin path, which is what you'll copy and paste into your config file to enable that plugin, the type of plugin it is, and then a little bit of a short description about what the plugin actually does. So you can run that with APRSD list plugins. And so, hey, let's test one of these guys out. Let's see what happens. Let's test the ping plugin. So this is exactly what I do when I develop APRSD plugins. Dev, okay, so it's test plugin, and what do I have to pass in? Oops, no question mark there. So these are the options for test plugin itself. So let's pass in a plugin, the ping plugin. Let's copy and paste that. And let's send it, the next option here is the message that you want to send the plugin. So a lot of the plugins require looking for specific regex in the message to determine whether the message for itself versus another plugin. So in order for ping to work, it actually is looking for a regex of p or ping. So if I pass it ping, it should recognize that it's for itself and then reply with pong. All right, so this is the output of actually executing, standing up the plugin, passing in the message, and then the result, which would go over the radio if this was running on a real APRSD server. But in this case, since I'm just testing a plugin, it gets you directly there. So you can use this to develop APRSD plugins without even connecting to APRS itself or standing up an APRSD server itself. It's a quick and dirty way of doing plugin development, which I do a lot of. So this is an example of that. All right, that is a quick and dirty demo of the test plugin command that you use if you're developing plugins. And I'm going to have another video on plugin development as a follow-up to this, so don't worry about that just yet. So the next thing I want to talk about is the APRSD Listen. Listen. It can connect to the APRS network. Sorry for the noise, my cat is going through the wheel right now. And you can connect to the network and give it a filter of packets that you want to watch, and that's all it does. It doesn't send it through any of the plugins, it just allows you to connect to the network and it just dumps packets out. I use this for testing various different things with APRSD. So let's give it a filter of K star, which is probably going to open a big fire hose. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so that's APRS starting up, and you can see all of the packets that are flooding through from the APRS network. And yeah, so it's just going to dump out tons and tons of packets anywhere on the entire APRS network that is K star regex matching. We're going to see those dumped out here. So, only somewhat useful, mostly for development of APRSD and plugin development as well. Okay, so what else do we got here? So sample config, send message. Yes, you can send a message with the command line itself. Let's see if that works. Send message. Okay, so I have already set my environment variables here for the login and password. That's what is used for this particular command to connect to the APRS network. So let's send a message so it's going to send from this login to this call sign, and then whatever text you type in there. So I'm going to send myself a message, hey, this is a test. And you can specify whether you don't want to wait for an ACK, and also if you do want to wait for response. Otherwise it'll just send the message, wait for an ACK to come back, which I'm probably not going to get one because my radio is not on. So I'm going to say no ACK, -N, because my radio is not on currently, and that'll just send that message. So there it goes. It connects to the APRS network, sends that message, then exits. But if you want to wait for an ACK to get back to make sure that the person on the other side, the call sign that you're sending a message to, actually receives the message, you can omit that -N, and this app will sit there and wait for an ACK to come back before it exits. So that is the send message command. So the very next thing is, hey, running the APRSD server. Of course, that's why everybody's here, to check out. So let's figure out how to do that. All right, so we've decided that we want to run the APRSD server. We kind of have an idea of what kind of plugins we want to run because we've listed the plugins. And these are the plugins that are currently shipping with APRSD. I have a whole set of other plugins that I've developed separately, and I'll talk about that later. But for now, we decided that we want to run a simple weather plugin. So let's stand up APRSD, and so that means configuring it. So we got to configure APRSD to tell it certain information. So one is the login information of how to connect to the APRS network, what call sign is going to be registered for this particular APRSD instance. So someone out there in RF land can send it a message to say, hey, give me the weather. So what we do with that is, you'll notice if you run APRSD, we have a sample config command, which will dump out a predefined config file. So you run that sample config, and it'll dump out a big giant YAML, YML config file. And what you should do with that is output that to APRSD.yml. So it puts it out to a file. So now you can see that we have APRSD.yaml there, which is in from the output of sample config. Let's edit it, check it out. All right, so there's several different blocks in here. The first block is the APRSD block of configuration items, and this is how to connect to the APRS network. With that, you'll need a call sign, a real call sign with an SSID and the password. I provided a URL here to get you to quickly and easily create a password for that call sign. And my cat is, of course, playing as I'm trying to do this video. So you just go in there, you go to that URL, you enter the call sign -SSID combination, and it'll give you a password. You get that copy that password, come back here and paste it. So this is my call sign, and then I would go to that URL, enter the password. Let's just say, for example, it's 1234. And then there, APRS is configured. So now APRSD server can know how to connect to APRS network. Also, the important part about this login right here and SSID combination is that is the destination call sign you're going to send messages to from your APRS radio, to get APRSD to recognize that it is a packet destined for it, and then I'll send it through the plugins and whatnot. So the next section here is the APRSD section, which is configuration options for APRSD itself. Some of these things you can kind of overlook and play with yourself, but I'll talk about some of these which are important. The demo that I'm going to show today right now is not going to do email, so I don't need to enable email, so I'll disable it. I'll do a separate video on setting up just for doing email. So this is the list of all the plugins that I have enabled, and so we can get rid of some of these and just say we only want to run the weather plugin, because that's what we're going to demo here. Okay, so we're only going to enable the weather plugin here. So some of these other, the log file, the format that gets in the log file, where to save some of the data. Watch list itself is a whole nother feature which I'll talk about later, but the gist of it is that you can set up some call signs in here to look out for on the APRS network and then notify you when they come online. So if you have several buddies that you like to chat with over APRS but you don't know when they're on, this is a way to find out and get notified directly when they are online. Like, say for example, they turn their radio on and they start beaconing. APRSD will recognize that and send you a message saying, you know, KM6LYW is now on the APRS network, so then you can start chatting with them. That feature's been in APRSD for quite a while. This web section here is for the admin section. When you start up APRSD, the server, it has a whole web interface that you can look at the running state of APRSD, and I'll show you that next. But this is where you configure it. You set the to protect that web interface with a username. The default is admin, and you should change the password to something other than password. The next thing to set up is your ham call sign. This is your personal call sign, and so in my case it is WB4BOR. And some of the plugins look for this to say, for example, how to respond to certain aspects and some things, but you need to set this to your call sign. And then here's the KISS interface. That is if you want to run APRSD not connected to the APRS network, but connected directly to Direwolf. So if you have a digipeater or a out in the wild that has no internet connection whatsoever, but you still want to run some plugin that you want to invent and have it talk directly to, yes, there's my cat. And if you want to have APRSD talk directly to Direwolf, this will do it. And then the next section is called services, and this is where some of the other plugin settings are, and one of the most important that you should always set, otherwise some of the best features of APRSD and the plugins don't really do anything, is this excuse me, APRS.FI key. So you go to APRS.FI, create an account, log in, and then go to your account page. Yep, there's the cat walking in the wheel. Go to your account page and then get the API key and copy and paste it in here. And the purpose of this is some of the plugins need your current location to do something. Say, for example, getting the weather. If you want to get the weather, it doesn't know where to fetch the weather from. And so it looks for the beacon of the person requesting the weather on APRS.FI to get their last beacon location, and then it will search for the weather at that specific latitude and longitude specific to that area. So go to APRS.FI/account and look at the API key section in there, and then copy and paste that into here. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you standing up APRSD server. My gosh, cat. and doing a call to fetch the weather. Hopefully my cat will get its energy out by then. See you in a sec. All right, so let's show a running instance of APRSD. Let's stand it up. Let's look at the admin interface. and let's send it some messages and see what the weather plugin is, which is the only plugin that I've enabled, can do. So first thing we do is look at the options that we can pass in the APRSD server. And since we have our own config file in the current directory that we configured, let's go ahead and pass that in and stand it up. Let's enable debug logging and see everything that I can output. Then we'll go look at the admin interface and check that out. So let's log level debug-c for the config file. So it's passing in the config file and then setting the log level of the output to debug level so we can see all kinds of stuff. Let's stand that up. You can see APRSD starting. The first thing, I won't scroll up because it'll show some of the passwords and whatnot, but it'll show all of the config options and then stand up all of the plugins and then connect to the APRS network and then start processing commands. Since I enabled the web interface here, we can go over to the web browser and let's refresh this because we just started it 29 seconds ago. You can see that this is version 2.5.3 and this is the call sign that's registered for this version of this instance of APRSD. So if you want to send an APRS message from your ham radio, you need to address it to WB4BOR-12. And then it shows the APRS-IS server that it's connected to the APRS network. Since we just stood this up, we don't have any packets that it sent, received messages. I disabled email, and just for my personal use, I look at the memory usage just to see what's going on. This messages tab will show you the list of messages that is sent and received, who this APRS instance has received and sent message to and from, the watch list, who I've personally configured to look out for when it sees beacons and packets on the APRS network and notifies me, hey, your buddy KM6LYW is now on his ham radio doing APRS stuff, and it sends me a message. These are the list of plugins that are enabled, and you can see I've enabled basically only one, the US weather plugin. Help is always there. The config, I won't show you that because that has some of the passwords. You just looked at it. And yes, you can send a message directly from the admin interface. And this is the current state, the live view of the APRSD log output. So if you want to put this on a server, run it in a container, and then go back and scroll to the logs, you can do that here. So let's do something useful and actually send it a message. So let's go back out here to the charts, and on my ham radio, I am going to address a message to WB4BOR-12, and I'm going to ask it for the weather. So I'm sending a message of weather as the string, and there we go. I just transmitted it. Let's go look at the log file. Okay, there we go. You should see what APRSD received and then what it sent back. And so that's in the log file. We can also go back over to here and see that it's the same exact thing. This is the message that it received from my radio. APRSD sent an ACK back to the radio, so that way the radio knows not to send the message again, and then it replied with the weather. And the radio got an ACK back from the weather message. Alright, so let's go back over here and show you the admin interface. The charts, you can see the graphs of the packet sending and receiving, and you can see that it sent out more ACKs than it sent messages. And that's because on every message that is sent or receives, APRSD will respond with 3 ACKs that slowly delay over time, because as we know, APRS is not a guaranteed packet delivery mechanism. Some of the packets could get lost in the air between the iGate and the radio, so we try 3 times to get an ACK. excuse me, back to your radio. So let's go to the Messages tab. So this Messages tab is a list of all the messages that APRSD has sent and received since it started. So all the green items here are messages that APRSD has received directed to it, which is WB4BOR-12. And all the red marked items here are messages that APRSD has sent back over the air or to the APRS network. So you can expand each of these as well and see what the full decoded APRS packet actually looks like. And this is what actually APRSD uses to process each of the messages through its plugin mechanism. So this is the one that was received. Here's the raw string that it got from the APRS server, and that it was decoded into this. Makes it a little bit easier to process. And then this is the actual weather report that was sent back as the request. User requested. The the weather plugin looked up the location of the last beacon for this call sign WB4BOR, which is the from. This is the call sign that sent the packet to APRSD. It looks up the beacon to get the latitude and longitude of this call sign, and then fetches the weather for that latitude and longitude using the U.S. government's API servers that are out there. There's several different types of weather plugins that some work just within the United States, some work around the world, and there's different plugins for each of those if you want. But this is what you get back from our standard weather plugin, the current conditions as reported by the U.S. government, which is currently at my location is 66 degrees, sunny, and it gives you a little bit of a preview of what it's going to be later on tonight. So you could see that APRSD sent 3 ACKs back from the packet that it originally got. So this was message ID 49, and it will send 3 ACK packets back to make sure that the radio has the best chance of receiving that ACK so it doesn't respond again to it. And of course, you can look at the log file here of everything that's going on. So nothing's really going on because I haven't sent it any more messages. But I'll give you a quick peek into the repeat service. I just restarted it about 2 hours ago. I installed the new version of APRSD 2.5.3, but you can see that it's received maybe 1 request right now so far. And it keeps track of everybody that has used the service here, and quite a few number of packets that it sends and receives. I wish I'd have done this before I restarted it because there was lots and lots of messages and more interesting data. But this gives you a good idea of what the admin interface for APRSD looks like, how to configure APRSD, how to set up and use one of the plugins. And I will do a follow-up video to talk about the email service that the email plugin that ships with APRSD, because it's kind of involved, but it's really cool. You can have it check your own personal email account and notify you when you get new messages in, and you can send and receive emails from your radio with that plugin, which is pretty powerful and nice to have when you're out and about and someone needs to get in contact with you the old-fashioned email way. But anyway, this gives you a good idea about what APRSD is, some of the commands that it has, gives you a little bit of taste into how I do development for the plugins. And then next week I'll show you how to do some of the plugins and maybe a little bit of a development too. I'll do a video on that. But anyway, this is WB4BOR signing off, and I'll see you next week.